I'm sorry, Ron.
I'm sorry, there was some other matters.
No, not at all. Sergeant, I want to start, if I can, firstly with the fact that you said that you were really conscious of the bush telegraph and how it works. You've had a lot of experience, it would seem, from your evidence amongst various communities.
Yes.
Including you and me.
Yes, correct.
And when you were talking about the bush telegraph, you're talking about Chinese whispers, I take it, within the community.
Pretty much, yes.
Misinformation rapidly being distributed amongst many.
And especially with no control to control that, yes.
And that was something that you were attempting to achieve when you had that conversation, as we saw, and you gave that description, which you've been criticised for a moment ago, when you said something to the effect of the reason that the plan did not go, the reason that the police officer did what he did was because he thought he was going to die, or worse to that effect.
That's correct.
At that point in time, you were aware, weren't you, that there was a real risk that the community may have a misconception that this was simply, as it were, an execution killing or a shooting for no reason at all.
Exactly, yes.
What you did know, of course, at least at that time, was that you had information that Zachary Rolfe had been stabbed.
Correct.
That he'd been stabbed with a pair of scissors.
Correct.
And because of your training, you are acutely aware, are you not, of the potential lethal nature of the deployment of a pair of scissors.
Yes, correct.
I want to ask you a little bit about training. Training as a police officer first, and then I'll come to the TRG, the IRT, and so on. But is it correct to say that a pair of scissors, as benign as they might look to the ill-informed, are probably one of the most dangerous edged weapons you can use?
They can be, yes.
And it's your experience, is it not, over many years, that it's quite common for some Indigenous people to use or carry them?
I've had personal experience of finding people and carrying, yes.
And sometimes the scissors are cut in half.
Yes.
And that creates an even greater danger.
Yes.
And the reason for that is that you can swivel it around and it's very difficult to retrieve from a person who seeks to deploy it.
Correct.
And that's a weapon that you're familiar with and that you have seen before.
Correct.
And you knew, when you made that comment that we've just mentioned, you knew that from the information you had, at least, that Zachary Rolfe had been stabbed with a weapon such as that.
I've been told he'd been stabbed with a pair of scissors that night, yes.
Thank you. Now, I want to also deal with the concept, and I don't want to go back over evidence that's in detail from the trial, but in simple terms, the expression edged weapon equals gun is an expression that's well known to you.
Yes.
It's something that formed part and parcel of your training as a police officer and has been developed over quite some time.
Correct.
I'll come to changes in due course about the TRG post this tragic shooting, but I want to deal with the position, as it were, before the 9th of November 2019. 6 metres is regarded as being a significant distance, isn't it? That is the minimum threat for a firearm, for example.
Minimum safe distance for an edged weapon?
Yes.
Yes.
So if someone produces an edged weapon, is the first weapon you should use or draw being a firearm?
Depending on the circumstances, though, at 6 metres?
Yes.
Or yeah, at 6 metres you should be considering using lethal force, or a lethal option, sorry.
And when you say consider using a lethal option, you're talking about drawing, for example, a Glock?
Yes, correct.
And be prepared to fire the gun if necessary?
That's correct.
And the quicker the incident in question and the closer the proximity between the two, of course, minimises other options.
Yes, the less reactionary time you have to respond, yes.
And so as far as training is concerned, 6 metres is the minimum threat for a firearm as you've described. So if somebody's in next to you or very close proximity, as I understand it, the training that existed up to and including the 11th of November 2019 was that if someone produces an edged weapon, such as a pair of scissors, and deploys them at you as a police officer, you have to consider and seriously consider using your firearm in those circumstances.
You have to consider a lethal force option, yes.
Now, I want to ask you a little bit about two different options, the difference between, say, the TRG on one hand and what I'll call a general police officer. The training in terms of shooting or actually firing a firearm such as a Glock is that you should shoot for the centre body mass,
Centre of scene mass.
centre or scene mass.
Of scene mass, or what you see. Yeah.
And what's the logic behind that?
The idea is if you see a part that you can shoot, you want to try and maximise your ability to hit that target because it's the greater target area.
And the idea is to achieve immediate incapacitation.
Well, it's subject control through immediate incapacitation.
As far as the TRG is concerned, in similar or identical circumstances, are there differences as to where you should aim?
Yeah, Your Honour, for TRG, because primary role, like I said this morning, the police tactical group, we focus on counter-terrorism, high risk or hostage rescue situations. So we practice for the worst case scenario, there's a threat or a bad guy holding a gun up against a hostage with his finger on the trigger. So for that, we aim for headshots, which is aimed to take out the medulla oblongata, the back of the head, which is a brainstem. And the aim for that is that if you hit that area and incapacitate it, if he was still alive or the threat wanted to pull the trigger and shoot that hostage, he couldn't because the nerve passage through the brain to the limbs is able to be achieved.
As I understand it, when you did your...
Where's the specific area that you're aiming for in that situation?
From the front, we're aiming for just here, the back of the head. It's the top of the spine where the brain meets the top of the spine. It's called the brainstem.
you did your course, that is your instructor course in 2005, is that right?
My fire instructor course? 2008.
2008?
Yeah.
You subsequently became a tactical commander, is that right?
In 2012, yes.
And that's a national course?
Yes.
And since that time, or was it soon after that you became part and parcel of TRG?
I was a TRG member from 2003.
Thank you. And TRG actually trained the IRT, or did have a role in training the IRT?
That's correct.
Was the IRT, conceptually at least, as you understood it when it was created, was it designed predominantly to be a cordon and contain in high-risk situations until, for example, the TRG could get there?
Originally, yes.
And did that change?
Yes, it did.
How did it change?
There were some discussions about the capacity for IRT to deal with a situation if they had cordoned it, and if the person inside the building was now shooting hostages, what would they do next? And if TRG was still en route, what was that? What were police's responses to that?
So in those circumstances, if there had been, for example, an escalation which didn't permit time for the TRG to arrive,
Yep.
did the training then develop to allow them to have the skills to, as it were, get into the house and and take out the target?
Yes, Your Honour. So it was what we called an immediate emergency action, and that's that black roll that was referred to earlier today.
Now, you would have had an understanding, I assume it applies equally, correct me if I'm wrong, to TRG as opposed to IRT. But in essence, the IRT might be deployed for a high-risk target or a high-risk tasking.
If any deployment of IRT for high risk had to go through the approval of the OIC TRG, but there was the capacity to assist TRG in high risk operations.
Did you know much about Kumanjayi Walker before your deployment to Yuendamu on the 9th of November 2019?
Only in the WBOC report that the two officers at UNW had been attacked by an axe, or the axe incident, that's all I knew.
So you knew about the axe incident?
Yes.
And it was described in detail?
The WBOC report, Your Honour, was basically the watch commanders or the territory duty service will put a quick brief to the executive about any incidents of interest throughout that shift, that 8-hour period. And I was, as a OIC or acting OIC TRG, I was privy to that information. So anything that's come through of interest, I would be part of it, and that's how I saw
Did
it.
you actually view the footage before you were deployed to Yuendamu?
No.
Have you seen that footage since?
Of the axe incident?
Yes.
I saw some of it that night, I think, and then other than that, I've only seen what's been in the media or snippets through the inquest. I haven't seen its entirety, no.
Again, you would agree, would you not, that that is an extremely troubling and potentially very dangerous situation for a police officer?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah.
And would you agree that as a consequence of what happened, as seen on that footage on the 6th of November 2019, Kumanjayi Walker necessarily would be described as potentially, at least, a high-risk target?
I'd agree with that.
And he'd be a high-risk target because he had, on the 6th, sought to resort to an axe, which would probably be described as an edge weapon,
Yes, correct.
had the capacity to inflict fatal wounds, if that was the intent of the person holding it,
It could do, yes.
had used that weapon effectively to escape police.
Well, he did, yes.
Yes, and it would therefore inform police, would it not, that if he armed himself again, there was a real prospect that he might again seek to deploy a potentially fatal weapon against the police officer.
I'd agree with that.
And so that's what made him a high-risk target.
Yes.
Now,
Well, sorry, would have made him.
would have made him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I want to do is ask you this. You said that had you been asked to go and, as it were, be responsible, that when I say you, I mean TRG,
Yeah.
be responsible for the apprehension of Kumanjayi Walker, you would have accepted that, subject to all the other constraints of other jobs and the like.
Yes. Yep.
And that's because of the skill set of the TRG
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Yep.
and potentially the prospect that if Kumanjayi Walker did resort to using a fatal weapon again, you would have the skill set to try and deal with it.
We were better trained and prepared for those sort of incidents. Yes.
And likewise, members of the IRT, as trained, would be better equipped than, say, a general police officer.
Yes.
And so it was appropriate, and you can say this, of course, because of your expertise, training and the like, as much as self-evident, it would be appropriate in those circumstances for the IRT to be deployed, as it were, to effect the arrest.
For high risk.
In the case of Kumanjayi Walker, it was appropriate for members of the IRT to be deployed in those circumstances.
Well, they are higher trained and they have the beanbag shock as a less lethal option, so they enhances frontline's ability to arrest people. Yes.
All right. Now, I want to ask you a little bit about the plan. Well, firstly, before I go there, have you got your statement in front of you?
Yes, sir.
I don't want to go through the details, but it is important, particularly in the context of what you were seeking to achieve when you attended on the 9th of November 2019. But it's important that you were informed, were you not, about your background and experiences that you'd had within the community, not just that you were in the move, but anywhere else.
Informed to who or informed
The
by?
potential danger of the community unrest.
From personal experience being there, yes. So I knew of the risk. Yes.
Now, you mentioned that you'd already been to Inquest back in 2010,
Yes.
and that was on an occasion where you were the tactical commander,
I was a team leader.
team leader,
Team
as a
leader.
consequence of riots that occurred back in that year.
Correct.
And there were a number of houses and cars which were burnt.
Correct.
When you arrived, there were quite a number of people, 30 or 40 people, in a house who had barricaded themselves inside,
Yes.
with an angry mob of about 150 who were armed with an assortment of weapons who were intent on injuring those who were inside the house.
That's correct.
So your task was to protect those who were under siege or threat within the house?
My immediate task was that. The task was to go down and stop, obviously, the fighting overall, but my immediate task was to move those people to safety.
Cars were burning and a number of houses were badly damaged.
Correct.
After a briefing at the station, you went forward to the house and spoke with the occupants.
That's correct.
You engaged the traditional elders.
On both sides at the
That
house.
is on both sides.
Yep. With the CEO. Yep.
And when you say the CEO, what do you mean by that?
The administrative, the CEO of the community. There's a CEO who administers the council, distributes money, looks after it. I'm not too sure what they're called.
How many members of the TRG were deployed to those riots in 2010?
I think there was only 6 of us because that's all we could fit on the plane.
In any event, you conveyed to those who were assembled, the men and women that you've just mentioned, you stressed the involvement of the TRG was being to ensure that no police were injured
Correct.
and no more violence would occur between the warring parties.
Correct.
And it was you, I think, as you say in your statement, that managed to negotiate a truce for a short period of time,
Yes.
which permitted you to escort the people out of the house to a woman's shelter,
Yes.
following which the crowd moved in on the house and destroyed it.
Yes, that's right.
The TRG then maintained patrols over the next few days to maintain order and arrested the main instigators.
That's correct.
When you went in and you were deployed by the TRG or with the TRG on that occasion, what sort of weapons did you have?
We had everything but the pepper ball that we took to the move.
And were those weapons visible when you were dealing with the riots as described in your statement in paragraph 6 on page 3?
When I went and spoke to the family, they did the same on the Kumanjayi Walker incident where they were in a vehicle. I had them stay back 50 metres while I walked forward.
Yes.
So we'd engage them. They were ready to respond and protect me or the other police officer who was with me at the time.
So in other words, you had your officers ready and in a position, if necessary,
Yep.
to use those weapons.
In full kit. That's
In full kit.
Yeah.
And it was that incident that you were specifically referring to when we saw the conversation that you had on the video where you were trying to dispel the bush gossip.
Yeah, yes,
And trying to invoke their assistance.
yes.
In other words, you were saying, in effect, you've seen this before, let's just take things slowly.
Yes, definitely.
Now, obviously, and I think anybody in this courtroom would recognise that hindsight's a wonderful thing. And it's easy to go back, look at the exact words that were uttered on a given occasion and say, I could have expressed myself differently or better.
I agree with that.
And you've expressed those sentiments in this court.
Yes,
But at the time that you were dealing with, can I suggest, an incredibly difficult situation, it was, wasn't it?
oh, definitely.
And your concern was, and certainly given your experience in the past, with a flip of a coin, things could suddenly accelerate.
Yeah, and also, Your Honour, the family deliberately related to Kumanjayi Walker, they have an important role to play in what happens afterwards. And like I said, I agree my comments were not as empathetic as they could have been, but I thought it was important to convey with them we need to work together and move on. Now,
Attached to your statement is what I'll call, if you want a better description, your plan. I'll just find the statement. It's Annexure A.
Yep.
Can I just take you to that for a moment, if I may?
Yep.
We can see that it's an email from you to a number of people identified in the email on Sunday the 10th of November 2019 at 2:28. And you say, amongst other things in that email, very rough draft, but gives us something to start with until I get on the ground and establish the situation.
That's correct.
So in other words, you had limited information at that point in time.
Yes.
What you were trying to do in that plan was to foresee as best you could the different permutations that could exist on the ground when you got there.
Correct.
But any final decision making could not be made self-evidently until you did get there.
Until I spoke to the forward commander, correct.
And importantly, the time between the creation of this document and your ultimate landing and speaking to the forward commander, obviously things can change and can change dramatically.
Definitely.
So it doesn't matter whether this is your plan or any other plan. Ultimately, you have to be incredibly flexible, don't you?
That's exactly right.
Because things change.
Things change, yeah.
Now, just when you're talking about general policing, you've been involved, I assume, in multiple arrests over many years in all sorts of different situations.
Correct?
Every situation is different.
Yes?
Every situation turns on its own facts.
Correct.
Indeed, the way in which a police officer responds to a given situation will often be governed by the way in which the prisoner or the person who's being apprehended responds to police presence.
Yes, but also I would say it's also up to the police officer's experience and the exposure and what they've learned over time.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And to give you a simple example, if we go back to knife use gun, the 6 metre rule and all those sorts of things,
Yeah.
Obviously if a person is quite some distance away, they might be armed with an edged weapon, but because of the distance between you and the offender, that gives you greater options.
Definitely.
For example, trying to de-escalate by conversation, negotiation, things of that sort.
Correct.
Warn them that if they come any closer, you might deploy, for example, a taser or something else.
Correct.
All those sorts of less lethal options are available in certain circumstances, but it may not be possible
That's correct.
because it can be split-second timing
Yes.
and proximity can make those other non-lethal options simply not possible.
I will. Yes.
All right, now back to the plan. At that stage, you didn't know how serious the situation was on the ground.
No.
When you were circling in the plane, were coming in, you were communicating by phone, were you?
I contacted Superintendent Ops by phone to confirm the members on the ground of the airstrip had been cleared and we were able to land.
I think you mentioned earlier in your evidence that there was a concern by you, for example, from previous experience, that it might not be safe to land, for example.
Exactly right. Or it might be a case the members may be dealing with an incident and we get off the plane and no one's there to pick us up. So there's a combination of factors.
Again, you have to keep an open mind.
Yes.
The plan has to be flexible.
Yes.
And it was your plan because you had the skill set as a TRG member and the person in control, if you like, of those TRG units.
Yes.
Certainly the officer in command who was, sorry, what was his name again? The forward commander?
Terry Zhang, Sergeant Zhang.
He didn't have any real experience, did he?
From when I spoke to him, no, I don't think he did.
He certainly didn't have experience in such a serious situation as the one that potentially was unfolding before your eyes.
No, I'd agree with that.
And that's why your skill set was so important.
Yeah.
And can I put this to you? It must have been self-evident by him and to the forward commander that he was relying very much on your expertise to make sure, as best you could, that there was no escalation.
Yes.
There was no repetition, for example, of other officers being put in a position where they might have to deploy weapons, whatever that might be.
And also the capacity to deal with those situations, yes.
Yeah. So he was deferring, as it were, to your expertise as to how this situation should be managed.
Yes, correct.
We know from what you've told us that when you spoke to Sergeant Frost, by the time you get to speak to her, she's plainly exhausted.
Correct.
And I think I won't need to go to the exact words that you used in your statement, but basically she was not in a position to really assist you at all.
Correct.
And it was at your direction, when I say direction, you suggested that she really did need to go and get some sleep.
Definitely.
She was plainly exhausted and no doubt traumatised by the whole experience.
Yes.
As anyone would be.
Yes.
Now the plan. What I'm going to do is going to ask you some questions about just basic policing, and then I'll come to the situation that existed as confronted by the members of the IRT in the lead up to the shooting. I can tell you this much. Police officers, that is the members of the IRT, and an officer who's in control of a dog by the name of Mr. Donaldson, arrived at the Uindamu police station. They had been told that they were deployed. They had been told what their kit was to comprise of, and I'll come to that in a minute. And they were told that the mission was the apprehension of Kumanjayi Walker. Can you just assume all of this for a moment?
Yep.
Can you assume also, and it's common ground, that at that point in time, that is when they arrived, no one knew where Kumanjayi Walker was?
Okay.
Can you also assume that all police officers knew that the last known address that he'd been at was House 577 where the axe incident occurred?
Okay. Yep.
Can you also assume that they were told that if you come upon him, arrest him?
Yes.
All right, I'll just take that on board for now, which is not controversial. I want you to assume that they were deployed at 7:05 by Sergeant Frost, 7:05 p.m. that night, and they went from there directly to House 577.
Okay.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to get some footage played to you, which is this, if you like, what some describe as a search, but the attendance at House 577. And from your expertise, I want to ask you about the approach that was taken by these officers at that location. You understand?
Yep.
I wonder if you could play, please, the Rolf body-worn video 1 of 2. 1 of, what is it? 1 of 4, my apologies. That's that too. I think the person in the passenger seat is Constable Zachary Rolfe. You can't see it, but the driver of the car, I think, on the evidence, is Officer Kirsten Belt.
Yes.
And they're driving with 2 other officers behind and the separately the dog handler to House 577.
Roland! There's a door here, I got an old man at the front I want to talk to. Want to cover that door? Hey sir, how are you? Is this your house, mate? Is this your house? Your dad's house, Eddie's house, eh? Hey man, my name's Zach. Nice to meet you, mate, how you doing? Hey, we're here to grab Arnold up, eh? Is he inside? It's no trouble.
No one's ever been here.
Do you mind if I check inside? So do you know where Arnold would be? Because we've got to get him. Or is he over that way?
So far what we've got is these men all gone to House 577, being the last known place where Kumanjayi Walker had been, where, as you've heard, the axe incident occurred. And you can see Zachary Rolfe engaging with a member of the community on two fronts. He's told them why they're there. He's asked for permission to go into the house, and he's asked whether Kumanjayi Walker is there.
Yep.
Now, just talk generally about being a police officer. And you talked about the Bush Telegraph.
Yeah.
Police officers who go into the community in plain clothes, it's going to get around the community very quickly.
Yes. I would say any police officer they're not familiar with will get around the community quite quickly.
Exactly. If a person has a warrant out for their arrest and they're a known flight risk, for example, we've known 2 days before, we took off with an axe on that occasion, does it not, from a police perspective, from your perspective, make sense that as soon as they move to that location, trying to identify where he might be, that inevitably, if Kumanjayi Walker is in the community, he's going to get tipped off fairly quickly. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
And also, in terms of trying to find out where he is, if you don't know where he is, you have to, as a police officer, rely on what's been called intelligence gathering. But in simple terms, asking members of the community if they can say where he is.
If you don't have that intelligence from the local police, yeah, you have to go and ask people where he is.
Right? I think if we can keep playing for a moment.
Where's the other? He's at the other side. What house at?
Oh, sorry. Well, whilst Constable Rolfe's engaging with that member of the community, you can see that there's a police officer who's positioned himself, and the evidence is that other police officers are positioned around the house. Would you expect that to happen?
Put a cordon around the house, yes, in case he tried to flee.
Just for the record, what is a cordon around the house?
We're just surrounding the house, so if anyone was tried to escape, you can capture them, prevent them from leaving.
Now,
Yeah.
you said, I think, that in your situation, which is, of course, after the strategic shooting, you can find members of the TRG to a police vehicle even though they were armed with long arms and the like. And you said that you weren't aware of, I think your evidence was, you weren't aware of, or you may have said you were aware of the crime scene, but...
Only after effect with the inquest or the media.
Thank you. But you weren't aware of, and you didn't consider it was necessary at that stage for long arms to be exposed in any form.
That's correct.
Just questioning here the issue of police officers carrying a beating shotgun or a long arm of some description in the community. From your perspective, looking at it there, was that appropriate or inappropriate, bearing in mind the target and the mission to find him and arrest him?
The beanbag shotgun?
Yes.
It's an AR-15. It's not a beanbag.
AR-15, sorry.
AR-15? You want to look? That's a difficult question to answer. From my perspective in TRG, no, we wouldn't have got out with an AR-15 in the community. I would have had someone maybe in a car potentially, but we don't normally bring those weapons out unless we believe we're about to be an imminent threat. Now, if there was credible intelligence, we definitely knew he was in there and he was exhibiting violence, different story. But with that sort of case, where they're just walking around asking, I don't think that's appropriate, no.
Thank you. And you'll see, if he hasn't already, that Zachary Rolfe identifies 2 doors as he approaches this house. Can you push play?
Correct? Yep. I remember him saying that.
Show me on this photo, eh? So here. So on the outside of this oval?
Just around these areas.
Which one, eh?
These areas.
These ones? Okay, I might just check the house real quick. Who's he with over here?
No one but me.
No, but who's he with? Who's he staying with? Rakisha? Is he your Rakisha dad? Is he with Rakisha in one of those houses, eh? Thanks, man. I'll just check this to make sure it's all safe and then... What was your name again, sir? What was your name again? Ethan, nice to meet you, man. Hey, Jimmy, I'm gonna go in. Hey? Yeah, I got this. Jimmy was Sweet.
Hello, mate.
Hey, guys.
That's the little fella just talking to.
He just left.
Yeah, he's just telling me. Thanks for that, man. If you stay quiet, man, don't tell me you're here. Okay? Because otherwise, it's going to end up...
It's locked, but
Actually, pretty true,
yeah. Ethan told me another place as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir. Yeah.
I want you to assume, well, first of all, do you know what the expression clearing a house is?
Yes.
What does that mean?
It means you're moving through the house to find if there's any people, threats or otherwise inside the house.
And bearing in mind that the target, the person that they're looking for, is Kumanjayi Walker, who's got a warrant out for his arrest and the background that we've discussed already. Is that what you would properly describe as clearing a house?
They're actively searching or clearing it, looking for him, yes?
So just making sure that he's, contrary to whatever information might have been conveyed to police, he's not in the house?
Yes.
And is that perfectly consistent with normal police training?
Yeah.
I want you to also assume that in the course of those exchanges, further intelligence or information was given to the police, in particular, that is to Phil and Walker and Rob, that they had missed Kumanjayi Walker by a matter of minutes,
Okay.
and that he headed off to one or two houses, one of which was part of one.
Okay.
If you had that information in those circumstances, would you expect those police officers to immediately follow that lead?
In the sense that they were actively searching for him?
Yes.
Yeah. If you had information that the person you're looking for is at a location, yeah, you would go to that location and look for him.
And then if you attend to that location and you subsequently find that he is actually within one of those houses, you'd expect him to be apprehended.
Yeah, in a general duties form, I see where you're coming from, Mr. Wilson, but I guess the difference for me is I would have a local member with me, but yes, you're right, they would go to that house and look for him as they've done just here.
Now, you say you would have had a local member with you. Would you, if you'd attended Uindamu Police Station, would you have asked specifically for a local member to accompany you when you were deployed at 705?
Yes, I would have.
Now, there's an issue, a factual issue that you can't resolve. It's something that the coroner has to resolve. But I want you to have a look at the actual plan, which is Annexure E to the, I think it's the affidavit of Jody Knowles.
I think it's becoming exhibit now.
14, is it? Is it the 14, I think? You should have a copy of that in front of you.
Yep, the email from Sergeant Frost to watch commanders and Sissy Knobs, yeah.
I want you to assume this much. That email was sent at the time that the members of the IRT were in transit.
Okay.
That is heading to the Uindamu Police Station.
Yep.
There is a dispute which Your Honour will have to resolve as to whether the contents of this email was ever explicitly brought to the attention of the members of the IRT.
Yes.
That is the content of it explicitly, or whether, if it wasn't, it was verbalised nonetheless by Sergeant Frost. The important part of it that I want to direct your attention to is that you'll see that the deployment contemplates that they be deployed at 11 p.m. that night upon their arrival on the 9th of November 2019 on page 2.
No, page 2, sorry. Oh, yep, under plan day 1.
9 November 2019, 11 p.m.
Yep.
ART commenced duty. Well, we know that they were deployed at 7:05.
Yep.
We know that they didn't know which house or where Kumanjayi Walker would be located.
Yep.
We know that
When we say that we know that they don't know where he's located, they have information that he's likely to be at one of a number of houses, which is what we see here going from house to house.
Yeah, I can only assume the information they have from Mr. Wilson telling me, sorry, Your Honour, I don't know for a fact what information they had at the
So no
time.
one knows for a fact where he is or if he's even in the community.
Exactly.
But-
I would assume that is always the case. Unless we actually cite them, we have no idea where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's information available about the houses that he normally frequents or stays at.
Yes, yeah. I'd expect the local members to have an understanding where family ties are and where he hangs around, especially since his girlfriend Rakisha's in town. That'd definitely be a place of interest.
And you know that as I've told you, House 507 was the last known address that he was at, which is where the incident occurred.
But I must note that was 3 days earlier.
That's
but,
right.
Yeah, and they are very transit and moving between houses depending. Yeah.
Of course. In other words, there was no firm intelligence at all as to where he would be, if anywhere, within the community, as Honest just said, within the community, or all we know is that there were at least 2 houses identified which were connected to him.
Yeah, correct.
With an arrest plan, and again, TRG is obviously a very different position, can I suggest?
Yep.
But even and given your knowledge and training in respect of the IRT, you mentioned before that you would have expected that when they left the Uwindamur police station, one of the officers amongst the IRT would have been the nominated team leader.
Yes, I would agree that someone would have taken responsibility for the team.
How should that, in your view, have manifested itself?
Well, I guess it comes down to you have a conflict of interest in relation to seniority in relation to rank, and then you have another one in relation to experience. So you may have for example, a senior constable in a team, but you might have a constable who's been in an IRT 3 or 4 years and might have done 3 or 4 deployments, so his experience is higher. So I guess either way, they would have to work them out themselves. And I think generally as police, we tend to find someone will pick their hand up, a natural leader will put their hand up and take responsibility.
When you say might put their hand up and take the natural responsibility, that doesn't necessarily mean I am going to be the team leader, you obey me. It might be self-evident who's taking the lead, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And if somebody appears to be taking the lead, you'd expect those who work together so closely in that format would just follow.
Yes.
You'll see in the plan, if I can turn to page 3.
But what
So
about an IRT deployment where it's different people going out every deployment and it's not necessarily that they've got experience working with each other in that way?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Your Honour, but I guess it comes down to you might get 2 vans in Darwin go to domestic, for example. The supervisor doesn't go. And it may be a case of someone who's got more experience will step up. With IRT, I guess because they come from different areas within the place, within Alice Springs and different patrol groups, traffic or wherever they come from, they don't normally have that consistency like TRG does where we all work together, all train together, we understand that hierarchy. So with IRT, I guess it'll come down, I would assume, from my experience, would be that they would look to the person who's been in the unit the longest. It's an IRT deployment, who's got the most experience, and they would probably look for that person for guidance, I guess.
Can I just come back to that concept, pick up where I'm on the issue that Verona's just raised? There's obviously a difference between a high-risk deployment of IRT members and using the IRT for general duties to arrest a potentially high-risk target. We've heard a lot about that in this road.
There's more governance in a high-risk job than a central support task, yes.
And when you're talking about having a nominated, the expectation of having a nominated leader, are you not talking about it more in the context of a high-risk deployment?
Well, yes and no, because even our general support task at TRG, we make sure we've got someone in charge, but that's our thing. But I guess, Mr. Edwards, this is the reason why I guess some people had a few concerns about IRT being deployed, is that where was their command and control for them going? They got a higher level of skill, a higher level of experience. They're going, for this example, going to see Sergeant Frost. She might not know everything that they can do, so who's going to convey with her, hey, this is what we can do for you, or whatnot. This is the problem with that unit at times, that you have a group of people who are part-time working something, and you don't have effective leadership through training, experience, or other reasons. It gets a bit of, I guess, messy. I don't know.
It gets messy, and it gets worse if there isn't clear communication and direction.
Yeah, it does. I'd agree with that. Yeah.
You'll see in the plan It says implementation of the plan. You'll see on page 3, locations of interest. House 577, Uindamu, primary residence. That's the house we've just seen on the video footage. And then a number of other houses are mentioned. You see that?
Sorry, where about? Oh, down the bottom, page 3. Yes, yes.
And then we've got a heading equipment. The equipment includes beanbag shotguns by two AR-15s, swags and safety equipment.
Yes.
Given your understanding of the IRT as it existed then, from your training packages and the like, was there any specific training as to, even though you might be kitted with this sort of equipment, about when it was appropriate or not appropriate, as the case may be, to have visible any one or more of those items?
I think it was up to their discretion what equipment they took on the jobs they did. But one thing we did instill upon them in the TRG training, again, was that tyranny of distance. It's better to have it and not need it than be in a position where you needed a bit of equipment and it could take hours before you could use it. In this case here, because of the edge weapon, I would expect them to take the beanbag shotgun as a must.
Yes.
The AR-15s, I'll leave that to their members' discretion. And I guess, I'm only summarising here, Your Honour, that they probably took it just in case. What happens if we find Kumanjayi Walker and he's in a house, we end up with a siege situation and TRG are called down, wouldn't we want to have a better capacity down with us? And that's, again, it's purely an assumption.
That was a slightly different answer to the question which was asked, which was making decisions about when it's visible in the community and taken out into the community as being taken to the station and available if needed.
Okay, so being visible in the community with those firearms, that's the member's discretion, or I would say to be the team leader's discretion as to what and when they should carry it or how they should carry it.
And again, that might be governed, for example, about how quickly you might need to access if a situation arises, that particular weapon.
Yes.
And of course, that's a resourcing issue too. How many are you?
Yeah, how many people you've got, how much equipment you've got.
Is it realistic, or is there the capacity, for example, if something arises which requires urgent attention, to actually go back to the police station to retrieve a particular weapon and then return to the scene? I mean, that might be practically completely unrealistic.
It could be, yes.
Now, you mentioned before, again in a completely different scenario, that you would not by choice arrest somebody at night or go into a house at night. Something along those lines.
So you have to refresh my memory what context that was discussed in.
Well, I think it was talking about whether you go into the community at night or whether you would wait until daylight. I can't remember how you expressed it. Doesn't matter. I'll try it a different way.
Yes, sorry, I can't.
The plan itself contemplates, if you look carefully at the plan, it contemplates a number of things, but the first is that plan day 2, Sunday the 10th of November, 11 p.m, ART commence duty and conduct high visibility, sorry, my apologies. Day 1, I should say. 11 p.m, Saturday 9 November 2019, 11 p.m, IRT commence duty and conduct high visibility patrols and respond to call-outs. Then Sunday 10 November 2019, 5 a.m, Donaldson Alafeo, who's the community officer, commenced duty along with ART members to effect an arrest on Walker at 5 a.m. Now, self-evidently, that would assume you know where he is at 5 a.m.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Now, as a police officer, I'm talking about the practical realities, leaving aside for a minute specialist training such as TRG and IRT. Is it preferable to arrest an individual in daylight, if possible?
It depends the time, the daylight. The late afternoons can be tricky because there may be alcohol involved, people drinking, people out and about. Mornings are normally best, but the advantage of daylight is that if someone was going to escape or run, you can see them, so you can chase them. So if you have a foot pursuit, for example, you can see them.
If it's going to be, or the plan is, a 5 a.m. arrest, then presumably you'd need to know precisely where that person is.
Well, yeah, you may hedge your bets on a house, which is what we've seen, but the idea of that 5 a.m. one was to catch them asleep, which is safe to everyone, obviously. Yeah.
But if you don't know where he is, you don't know where he is, but you've got intelligence that you've only missed him by a matter of minutes, you've got an arrest warrant out for his arrest. In those circumstances, you'd expect a police officer to follow that intelligence, wouldn't you?
If you were credible intelligence at the time, you knew where a person was, yes, you'd follow it up.
Right. Now, I want to turn, if I can, to a completely separate incident.
I'm just rising to my feet. I'm not cutting Mr. Edwardson off. I just know that we're at 5 to 5, and I don't know where.
Are you available?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, you're on. Yeah, I can work that out. Whatever you need.
Sorry that there was some extended late start and some extended breaks. That's not our normal course.
Perfectly
We try and run a tight ship, but there were a couple of other matters that we had to deal with today. So I apologise for delaying you, and we'll continue with your evidence at 9:30.
All stand. Sorry, I've got nothing.
Believe this. That's right. No one needs to report.